Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. My name is Dr. Diane Kaufman. I prefer to be called Diana for my creative self, and I'm a poet, artist, retired child psychiatrist, Humanism in Medicine awardee, and the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And there's co-host Kino Isaac, coming from South Africa, and Kino is a DJ, music producer, entrepreneur, and a mental health advocate of independent artists. And our special guest today is Dr. Molly O'Shea. Dr. Molly attended undergrad and medical school at the University of Michigan and completed her residency in pediatrics at the Children's Hospital of Michigan in Detroit. And since then, she has been both a practicing pediatrician and an independent practice owner. Her practices, Birmingham and Campground Pediatrics, have behavioral health integration and serve families in Southeast Michigan. Dr. Molly has been involved in the American Academy of Pediatrics throughout her career as a journal editor, national CME planner, and faculty member. She is now one of the Academy's official spokespeople, writing op-eds and providing media interviews on various topics, including suicide prevention, technology and children, vaccines, and water safety. As an ambassador of the AAP Center of Excellence on Social Media and Youth Mental Health, Dr. Molly provides information to parents, educators, pediatricians, and media outlets about the impact of social media on youth and tools to keep kids safe and healthy in the digital age. She is currently on the executive committee for the Council on Communications and Media and is co-author of the upcoming AAP policy statement about AI and childhood. Dr. Molly lost her son to suicide in January 2019. Her passion for youth mental health and support for families runs ever deep. Welcome, Dr. Molly, to Talking Back to Suicide.
Thanks, Diane. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So, Molly, let's jump right in. Tell us about where is youth mental health at these days, right, in the United States and as well as globally?
You know, youth mental health is at an all-time crisis point. We are seeing a level of discomfort, disquiet, and difficulty in especially adolescents, beginning in the middle school ages, starting around age 11, somewhere around there, and continuing through the high school years and into early adulthood. And that looks like a combination of both anxiety, depression, and difficulties with social relationships. Now, I don't want to make it sound like every person, you know, in those age groups is struggling. There are still the vast majority of kids who are going about their lives really managing well, but compared to ages past, we are seeing a significant difference in the number of kids who are struggling relative to the way it used to be.
Why is that?
Yeah, why is it, right? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it, right? You know, I think that we are still figuring that out. It's so easy, or not easy, but it's so simple to point the finger at the introduction of technology, the influence of social media and its algorithmic pull, and say, oh, if we only didn't have that, maybe we wouldn't be where we are. But there is a lot more happening in the lives of children leading up to adolescence during that early adolescent phase and into that teenage and young adult years that go into play, that it isn't quite as simple as saying that the smartphone ruined everything, as media portrays and would like us to think. If we look at how childhood has evolved since the time even I was raising my own kids, who are now, range in age from 26 to 30, childhood is very different than it used to be. Children no longer spend the majority of their time in the years leading up to middle school playing in an unstructured way with one another. They spend the majority of their time playing and interacting in adult supervised ways, whether it's from the beginning of early childhood with, mini soccer, starting at age 4, or, youth programs that are supervised, and even recess, playground play during the school day is adult proctored in ways that it wasn't previously. And all of this experience that children have with everything being adult monitored, adult intervention, and adult proctored results in a different kind of experience for children. They no longer have the opportunity to sort of, stretch their wings, to walk up to that risk line that is, what we call a healthy risk, a developmentally appropriate risk, decide whether they want to take it, stumble a little bit, recover, do all of that on their own without an adult being around. They also don't have to learn how to negotiate with one another for things. And so learning how to advocate for yourself, how to take a loss if you didn't get the rule you wanted, or if whatever the rules of the game that you had to, if you only had 4 people to play, baseball out in your yard, well, the rules were going to be different. And so you had to make up a different set of rules. And if you, hit the ball and you thought it was in and someone else thought it was out, there was no adult there to negotiate that for you. So you can imagine a whole bunch of other scenarios, and and you had to initiate the play as a child. You had to on the door and say, can someone, you want to go out and play? So even just initiating the play was child-led. Today, it's very different. Everything is adult initiated, adult proctored, adult resolved. And then children get to middle school age, 11, 12, and they say to their parents, I don't want to do all that stuff anymore. I don't want to play soccer or baseball or whatever. And their parents like, whew, thank goodness. I'm tired of driving you around. That's great. And now you can just spend time hanging out with your friends. But you know what? They don't have any skills built. They don't know how to do the equivalent of knock on the door and ask, do you want to hang out with me? And that time of life, when you're kind of just beginning puberty, you are already sort of in this age of uncertainty about yourself, to then layer on top of that, the potential of being embarrassed or saying it the wrong way or being rejected. These kids aren't going to go out and have confidence enough to, do the equivalent in today's day and age of knocking on the door and asking someone to hang out with them. And so they don't have that skill, and they don't have the skill of making a mistake on their own and recovering. They don't know how to have these peer relationships. So in some ways, I look at it as someone who's been around for a long time, and Diana, I'm sure you do too, and you think, well, who wouldn't be anxious? I'm amazed anybody is normal, thinking about it in those ways. And so given all of the shifts, there is kind of it's no surprise then when we add something like technology to the mix, that some of these kids who are especially vulnerable, and we can talk a little bit in a bit about what makes someone more vulnerable than someone else, when we hand them a device that sort of gives them all the answers, or in some way gives them a roadmap to, whether it be a roadmap to being cool or a roadmap to, seeming like an adult, whatever. Why is it that some kids fall into, a little bit of difficulty and other kids don't?
In Oregon, where I live, suicide is the 8th leading cause of death.
Yeah, it is. The suicide rates, and in some subgroups within adolescence, it's dramatically higher. So if you are a minority youth, if you are an LGBTQ youth, rates are dramatically higher. And we have seen the rates of suicide really climb and get younger and younger in age. The risk of suicidality is increasing, both in numbers and decreasing in age, in part because these kids really don't have the resilience that you typically gain over childhood. I mean, that's not the only issue, but one of the issues is that there is some lack of a resiliency that is gained through childhood, just through the normal childhood experiences of childhood play and, having to negotiate the world.
And I'm thinking too that what across the United States, in a youth population, and it might even be through into the 20s, right?
Yes,
That suicide is the second leading cause of death.
correct.
And
Correct.
and for those youth in college, it's also the second. Those numbers are astounding.
It is crazy. And there really are, if you look at graphically, at vulnerable ages, there are two vulnerable time frames. There's the ages between about 11 and 13, and the ages again at that just past graduation high school into about 20 years old. And those times appear to be times of vulnerability for depression, for anxiety, and for suicidality. It's not to say that suicidality, depression, anxiety can't occur in other times. Obviously, they can occur at any point. And if we look at suicidality over the lifetime, men in their middle age are the biggest risk group. But if we're talking about youth, these time frames are really crucial times in the life of youth, when they are particularly vulnerable to having difficulty with their mental health.
Now, Dr. Molly, does a person, is it necessary as a factor to have a quote psychiatric illness, a DSM-5 diagnosed criteria mental illness, to evolve into a state where one may be considering taking their life? Or are we talking about an increase in psychiatric diagnosed disorders, right? Or are these other circumstantial factors playing a role?
Well, of course, every year there are people of all age groups who die by suicide, and it comes as a complete surprise to their loved ones, their friends, to the community around them. And there is no evidence anywhere of an underlying psychiatric background for them. So it is important to recognize that suicide really can appear to come out of nowhere. So you do not necessarily always see the evidence of an underlying predisposition because of a mental health issue. But the majority of the time, you will find some evidence that there has been a mental health struggle prior to that. And although not everybody seeks care for the difficulties that they face, And so, the question of, does everybody have a psychiatric diagnosis prior to attempting suicide or dying by suicide? The answer is not always yes, but because they may not have sought care. But if you kind of dig a little deeper, if it wasn't one of those just out of the blue, no idea situations, many times, the vast majority of the times, you can discover that there were underlying difficulties that were present.
Are there warning signs?
Mm-hmm. If someone is exhibiting difficulties, then often, especially youth, are a little bit more vocal than some adults might be, and they may be talking a bit more about death in general, and just asking questions or talking about death. They may begin to like you might have heard about, give away precious things that are very meaningful to them. And they may be saying things that sound kind of off cuff, but really have a deeper meaning. Things like, oh, it'd be so much easier for everybody if I just, weren't around. Your life would be so much easier if you wouldn't have to drive me. It would be so much easier for you if I just, weren't here and you didn't have to deal with me. Those kinds of what sound like kind of adolescent, I'm just trying to make you feel guilty statements, that sort of thing. But sometimes in the milieu of other things, those are not just the, oh, I just, you were complaining because you had to stop what you were doing to drive me, so I'm going to make you feel bad statements. Those can be meaningful statements for some teenagers. If you used to have a relatively connected relationship with your teen, and now it's difficult to get them to talk to you, if they're withdrawing and avoiding contact, if they're separating from you, sometimes that's actually a healthy thing for adolescents to do as they begin to discover, who am I as an individual? I'm trying to figure out who I am. And so I got to step away from my family unit in order to figure that out. But they should, in those situations, be walking toward a group of peers, right? They should be trying to figure out who they are by walking into a group of peers. So if they're withdrawn from everybody, that's another sign that could be concerning. Other signs would be if they'd previously been a great student and that's not happening, if they used to be engaged in school activities or other outside of school activities and they've just sort of, given up on that sort of thing. Those are all signs. If they've stopped taking care of themselves hygienically, not showering as they used to, if they used to be careful about what they wore, how they looked, and they're no longer interested in making that effort, those are also concerns.
I haven't read the article yet, but I saw there's an article in the New York Times today about, I believe it's in Australia, that there may be some rule about under 16
Yes,
not being allowed to be on social media.
correct.
Could you talk a bit about social media and its impact on, especially on youth?
Yeah. So first I want to define a little bit what is social media, because I think we will all put certain things in the social media bucket, right? We'll all put Facebook, we'll all put Instagram in the social media bucket. But there are lots of other things that are in the social media bucket. YouTube is in the social media bucket, Snapchat, Discord, Reddit, any place where you can have a communication with someone else and where you are kind of putting out content as well about yourself, where there is that give and take, where there is an algorithmic relationship that enhances things. Those are a couple of the components. So there has to be some sort of social aspect, meaning that there's a give and take, and there is some posting element. That's what makes social media. So you are right, and they're not the only area of the world that is beginning to put age restrictions on social media, but Australia has, this is their, the boom has been lowered, and teenagers are now going to be off it. They don't have, though, an age verification process in place, so you don't have to put in a birth certificate or anything to, so they're relying on algorithmic based age verification tools, which they're decent, to challenge and confirm age. But the teenagers all through history have been incredibly capable of getting around whatever restrictions we have in place. I mean, if you had a curfew of 10 o'clock, you had a window that you could climb out of. If you had or you had a friend who was going to call your parents and make up some story. So, and I read the article. So the teenagers have already been talking about how they've already gamed the system. So I feel as though although there is some, there could be value to delaying until age 14 or so, based on the evidence, the ability for young people to have kind of unfettered access to social media and to just the internet at large, just unfettered. I'm not sure that this approach of having regulated bans will ever really work, and I'm not saying that therefore, no, we should never do it or any of that, but I think it can't be done as if to think that that will be the only way to create a safety net. In order to create a safety net for our adolescents, I think there are several things that need to be considered. First of all, we need to recognize that many teenagers use internet and social media without any difficulty at all, and do so and enjoy social media, actually finding community, finding connection, finding support, and learning things. And so to create an environment in which none of that is accessible until you're however old may actually put especially marginalized teens in a difficult space too, at a time when they could actually find value to these communities that they necessarily be able to find in their own smaller areas of a country. In addition, though, I think that part of the challenge, and believe me, I'm a parent too, part of the challenge is that parents are always like 2 steps behind their teenagers in the technology world. And the idea of having to be, capable, up to date, on track with putting in whatever constraints each one of these tools or devices or platforms has available to maintain safe guardrails it's work as a parent. But I do think that that's part of what is necessary in order to ensure safety. But the most important predictor of whether or not a youth of any age does well or not on social media, there are two, is connection with their parent. Are you a very connected parent-child dyad? And what is your parent, you parent, hello, me right here, what is my technology use? So if I am a heavy user of technology, my child is more likely to have difficulty than if I am not, even with decent connection. So I think messaging needs to be much more nuanced than just ban it. We need to be coaching parents to put your device down. Even though many of us work from home now, we need to create our own boundaries around our technology use at home. So our kids see us playing, right? Like actually playing, both with them, but for ourselves too, right? We need to play and show them what life looks like without a device. And we need to help our kids grow up before adolescence, playing in lots of ways that are not device driven, so that they have hobbies and interests beyond organized activities, so that independent play of a variety of types beyond technology use is something that they're capable of doing, want to do in the same way that we show them activities outside of technology use are capable for us. So those two things are hugely important, parental technology use and having a very open conversation as opposed to a, authoritative, this is how it's done approach to technology use with your children, to say, why do you want to be on Snapchat? Like, what's going on? Yeah. And all right, what are the risks there? And kind of talk it through in a way that creates a collaborative approach to technology use.
Molly, is there a specific policy that the American Academy of Pediatrics has, facts for families, regarding social media?
Yeah, well, the AAP has compiled a ton of information for families, and it's a part of the Center of Excellence. And if you went to aap.org/social media, you can find, frankly, probably more information than you ever need. Okay. It has everything from like every little social media app and what the parental controls are and how to do them, to, I have a 3-year-old, what kind of technology should they have, and how do I teach them how to do something else without using technology? I mean, it's got every age, every kind of conversation. And I think one of the great tools they have is called the Family Media Toolkit. And you can sit down and have that collaborative discussion with a child as young as 4, or just you and your spouse, and have a discussion and come up with boundaries around, like, what do you really want? What do you want to use your technology for at home? When do you want to use it? Do you want to have technology free times? How do we want to have our phones charging in our rooms or not? How do we make a promise to ourselves as a family in order to keep ourselves, having healthy habits around digital technology use?
I know that there is a push in a positive way within healthcare, pediatric care for youth, including social media, mental health awareness, there's screening, which we could also talk about. But I'm wondering, based on what you just said, to what extent, when an adult goes for their annual physical, and they may be a parent, is there discussion about use of the cell phone and being on social media?
Not at all. So I have, as I mentioned, I've got these adult kids, one of whom has had in the past an unhealthy relationship with technology. And there are screening tools that can be used. There's one in particular that's evidence-based. Problematic, let's see, Prius is what its acronym is, PRIUSS. I can't remember what all the letters stand for, but and so, I had him take this little screening test, and boy, that was not pretty for either one of us. And so I brought it with us to his adult medicine provider and shared it with her. And she afterwards, she said, I've never talked to an adult about their internet use ever. And I was floored because I can't believe he's the only one. I just
And
can't
he's
believe
not,
he's the only
yes.
one. So, yeah, I think that I think the assumption in the adult medicine world is that you'll recognize you have a problem and fix it yourself, I guess. And I look at it more as, although it's not an addiction in the same way alcohol might be or nicotine might be, it is an awareness of having a problem could be the same as not being aware that you have a problem with alcohol or nicotine or marijuana for that matter. And so being aware that it is a problematic use can be helpful.
Dr. Molly, this is personal.
Yeah.
And please share what you feel comfortable with in looking back, right? There's 2020 and hindsight, which may not always be 2020.
I was just going to say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking back, looking forward, lessons learned, and also, I also want to ask you something else, and I'll share something personal, which is that a teenage patient of mine had died by suicide. And actually, that was the second patient who had died by suicide. I also had a number of years prior, an adult patient had died by suicide. And following that teenager's death, in which she was being treated for depression, ADHD. She was on medication, low dose medication. The younger brother was my patient, and the older brother was soon to be my patient with an intake coming up. And she, on the surface of it, appeared to be the healthiest member of the family, in which there were also other problems going on. And in that session, she denied suicidal thinking, had denied suicide attempts. She even sang during the session when I brought up that famous quote, that what that does not kill me makes me stronger. My patient started to sing in the session Kelly Clarkson's song.
Mm-hmm.
And after her death, the very next day, and I should also include the mother and I, when she had left the session to walk to school, we both turned to each other and said how well she was doing. That totally shocked me, devastated me, and made me question my ability to care for other youth, as well my own self-perception, as well as I wonder how other families or adults, if they knew what had happened, would they feel safe with me as their provider? I do want to say that this particular family, that I continued to be the psychiatrist for the younger brother, and I continued to be the psychiatrist soon to be of the older brother as well. So they had comfort in my providing that care. However, this was my experience, and I wonder also how you might have felt in your own life.
Well, I can echo almost everything you said in that feeling of collapse of confidence. So my son, Connell, he was 17 when he died. It was 2019 when he passed. Oh. And he had graduated early from high school, then about a month before, because he was leaving 2 weeks after he died. He was supposed to have left to go on tour with a band, a very successful band. They were nominated for a Grammy later that year. He's a sound engineer, or was a sound engineer, and was just gifted. He had this really special gift. And I mean, to be that age and be going on a world tour with this band was a life-changing opportunity for him. And so it was right after the holidays, and it was, I thought he was in a really good place, you know. He you know, he and I had a very difficult relationship the last 2 years of his life. His dad and I had been divorced, and he had my household was more structured, and there were, you know, expectations of, you know, tell me where you're going, tell me when you'll be home, you know, all that sort of thing. And that sort of he didn't love that. And his dad's household was a lot less structured. And so he chose to be there. And we had enough contact that I knew broadly what was going on in his life, but not a lot of specifics, that was so difficult, you know. But so when he died, it was made more difficult because of our distance, you know. But I agree that it didn't make a lot of sense given the timing. You know, he had asked me back into his life for a while the fall before to help facilitate some of the school stuff in order to help him get what he needed done in order to graduate early. And so I was, you know, we had done that together, and I had, you know, been to a couple of the local concert things that he had been engineering. And so we had done some things together. I was so glad for that. And I thought, this is great. He's, you know, going to be going off. The first part of the trip was to Australia, and then they were going to Europe, and then they were coming to the US at the end. And it was going to be a really great thing. So when I got this call, you know, that he was dead, you know, I was just, I mean, part of me knew when the call came what it was. And, you know, because he had struggled so much. But part of me still was like, now you did it, you know, sort of like, why now? And it was so hard. It was so hard. Made harder, I think, like any grief would be, because of I believe strongly that the complexity of grief is in part determined by the complexity of the relationship, right? And so because our relationship was, you know, layered with all of these complexities, the grief's been difficult at times too. But I was, like you, crushed, you know?
That's the word.
Yeah, because I thought, holy crap, I'm a pediatrician who has behavioral health integrated in my office since 2009. And my own child, who got help, believe me, and got God's help, but he was, you know, compliant to a point, and, you know, and you can't make a person do stuff. You just can't. There's only, you know. So, but I thought, so when I finally I did go back into practice, but it took me a couple of months. And one of the first families I saw afterwards, I wouldn't see adolescents for a while. Like, it was probably close to a year before I would see teenagers again. But one of the first families I saw, this was when I realized how difficult it was going to be. I went in, he was like 9 years old or something. I'm doing my usual thing, and I do the same thing with every family. And I'm talking about anticipatory guidance, right? You know, okay, and do you wear a helmet when you ride your bike? And, you know, if you don't drink milk, you need to take vitamin D. And do you have any firearms in your home? You know, and the dad who was there goes, is that how he did it? And I'm like, I like caught my breath and I said, no, actually it wasn't. And I was like, oh my God, I can't see anybody anymore ever again. And, the whole thing. And so I realized that there were minefields, there were going to be little minefields. I would be walking into rooms. I wasn't going to know what was going to happen. And I was just going to have to go in with my guard up, not like my guard, but like ready for anything.
Yes, yeah.
And I questioned every decision I made for a long time. Like even an ear infection. I mean, stupid stuff I've been doing for 30 years. It's like, was that an ear infection? Should I be using antibiotics? So yeah, your confidence, I couldn't even do that for my son. How could I be doing anything? But over time, and by going through it, there's no way to avoid it. You can't go around it. There's no detour. It's not like construction zones, it's not like that. It feels it's as much destruction as a construction zone, right? The whole
destruction zone
in front of you is destroyed.
Yes.
But the only way is to go through it. And if you try to go around it or you just stand still and wait for it to clear, then it never does. So, and if you try to go around it, you realize the construction zone just gets bigger.
Yes.
And so I just started going through it and realized that I was going to, climb over a little part of it and then fall into a little hole and then climb over a little other area and get a little cut here from the jagged edge of a piece of the construction material and then climb a little over here and have to take a rest because it was hard. And, and then eventually you get through it. And, there's no magic trick. There's no, here are the 5 tips to getting through your grief. It's not like that. It's not like that.
Yeah.
But you get there.
And here you are as an advocate.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's because I climbed through all the, gravel.
Yes. Yes.
Construction material to get here.
Hands and knees and
yes.
bleeding. Yeah. And our hearts go out to you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, everybody has had something, right? This was my thing, right? And so it is by connecting to that difficulty, that pain, that, whatever, that if you can let yourself, then you can see the humanity in everybody. And it can allow any of us to be tolerant, patient, and not write anybody off, right? Especially today, in today's day and age, where people are ready to give up like their best friend over politics, for God's sake. I mean, come on.
I remember with my teenage patient that when I learned of her death, which was, I'd last seen her on a Friday. I learned on Monday, but the way that I learned was here I am at work and there was a missed cell phone call. Guess my mailbox was full. But I was at work, at my desk, at work. There were other ways to reach me. Right?
Yeah.
And I called back and the medical director answered. I said, oh, there was a missed call, right? Which I didn't necessarily have to call about a missed call.
Right.
And the first words out of his mouth were, your patient is dead. My first, so there's a humanity in how we talk to people
Yeah.
around suicide loss.
Yeah.
And my first thought, because it wasn't originally known how she had died,
Uh,
my first thought was, even though she was on a low dose of Adderall, I thought, oh my God, did she have a heart attack?
right. No, I think it's when I got the call, I saw who was calling. It was,
Mm.
Connell's dad, and he never calls, never called, literally never. I don't think he had phoned me once since we had gotten divorced. So, it's whatever, how many years later, 10 years later almost. And I thought, oh my goodness. So, I answered the phone and he said, you need to come over here right now. It's Connell. And I said, is he dead? And he said, yes. And I said, call 911. He goes, it's too late. I have called, but it's too late. So it was, but it's,
It was out of
yeah,
my grief of the suicide loss that I had experienced. That was those two patients and others, family member and a friend. And also, I had attempted suicide when I was in medical school. But it was out of all that that the Hold On campaign began.
yeah, yeah. I think it's so interesting as I work with families now and had before that, whose children are in difficult, really dire situations. I've come to think that the kids who talk about it almost seem to be, I don't know that this is true, this isn't science, this is anecdotal, almost seem like less apt to. And the ones who are, looking bad on their screenings, but say, no, I'm managing, become the ones I worry about more.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there was another article, I don't know if you saw it as well, in the New York Times about, I forget what it's called. They've got a new moniker for it, but
The suicide crisis.
yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I found that very interesting,
Mhm.
because it is, we've understood forever that, this suicidality, this mindset isn't persistent. And if we can just keep them safe, it'll fade. But um, this idea that there's almost like a switch for some people that moves them into that mindset was
If I remember that article, I think it had something to do with, almost, put this in quotation marks, like a state of mind. The
yes,
person may not have been having suicidal
yes,
thoughts, but they're agitated, irritable, there's a hopeless quality, a number of factors going on. And if someone asks them, are you thinking about taking your own life? The answer would be no, when at that moment, but with that constellation of symptoms, that
right,
they would be at, that one should take a second look at them.
right. They're the ones who like get discharged and die by suicide within 24 hours or whatever, like they check all the boxes but that one.
Yes.
It's like, yeah,
I can appreciate what you said about those who are not expressing the
right,
suicidal thoughts. I had an experience with a patient whereby she ended up telling me that years prior, when she was my patient, that she had nearly attempted suicide in a very, if she did it, she would have been dead. And this was years later. She
yeah,
finally told me about that. And when I said, thank you for telling me now, but what had stopped you then? And she said that, quote, I didn't want you to take it seriously. And it was eye-opening to me because I was thinking, similar to what you just shared, that, oh my God, it's not only what somebody is telling you, it's what they're not telling you.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think too, I wonder how you feel about this, Diana. I feel sometimes that, we each have these personal experiences with, um, other, whether it's like we both have patient experiences as professionals. I have an experience with my son, and there are times when, I'm with a family and, um, whether it's the patient themselves or the parent, sometimes I feel like you're not hearing how serious this is, one or the other of them. And I'm tempted sometimes to interject, my history with this in some way, either with a patient or pretend my son's a patient, whatever. And I've done it once and I regretted it. And I don't know, what has your experience been, if at all? Like maybe you just have never done it. I don't know. So what is your experience with that?
I've not shared specifics,
Hmm.
but I have shared with patients having had patients who died by suicide.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. I think, some people in our community know my life story, right? I'm a little bit known around town, that sort of situation, but not everybody. And so some people automatically know, and some don't. And the ones who know, um, often when they do have a child in trouble,
Yeah.
emotional trouble, will seek me out, as if I have some now, which is ironic to me. To me, it'd be like run away from me. But anyway, they seek me out in a way because they think now I have either some special knowledge of something, but at least I can have which is this part's true, I have some special um, understanding of the worry, the empathy for the parent, the genuine concern for the child, all of that piece is definitely dialed in. But I feel like, look, I don't, I don't have any special treatment plan for you. But
And suicide, um, probably, I'll put this in quotation marks, but suicide is such a public health and individual family crisis that
mhm.
I think most people know have been touched by suicide.
Yeah.
Kino, what are your thoughts?
Where do I even go from here? you know, but yeah, Molly, you're a strong. You're a strong individual. You know, it's touching. It's sad to hear that story. Um, I guess I got one question and then one opinion, and I'll get your thoughts on that. How does one, okay, I know you just mentioned, people look to you, how do I get through this? I've just experienced this, which makes sense. It's human nature. Let's seek out someone who's been through what we're going through at the moment. They will know what to do. But what has taken you through that gravel with your
Mm.
hands and knees?
Yeah. Well, I
Motivated you
do,
to stay alive.
right. I do have a strong faith. Honestly, that's been an important aspect for me, and has definitely given me strength and courage to keep moving forward. And I do have an amazing husband now, and he's been a source of great, and we've been married a while, so he's been a great comfort to me. And one of my children, honestly, has been remarkable. He's got developmental disabilities, mild cognitive impairment. And I think that has been his gift in a way, because it allows him to see, he's very emotionally, like super smart emotionally, even though other areas might have more challenges. And he can see things, with the clarity that, kind of intellect clouds. And so he's been very encouraging. There was a point along the way when I was driving him to work, and it happened to be it was morning, and it was a foggy morning, and we were driving, and he was beginning to come a bit more out of his grief, earlier than I was. And he said, "Mom, do you see the sun over there?" And there was just, a little behind all the fog, you could see the sun. He goes, "That's your happiness. If you look hard, you can see it. But the grief is like the fog. It's still making it blurry. But the fog doesn't last all day. It goes away. And so you'll be happy again. That's what grief is like." He goes, "Don't worry. You're not going to feel this way forever." And I'm like, holy crap, that was good, because there are moments in your grief where you feel like, am I always going to feel this way? Am I going to feel like either nothing at all ever again, or feel nothing, no enjoyment again? Am I forever going to hold sorrow in one hand when happiness is happening over here, And recently, a month ago, I had my first grandchild, and it was all joy. There was no sorrow. Like, I kept waiting for the sorrow to land, because for my whole life since he died, it's been a little bit of sorrow, a lot of joy, or a lot of sorrow, a little joy. It's been this whole balancing act. And that night, there was no sorrow. It was all joy. And that was a really nice experience, And I explained it to Declan, my son, who was, helping me. We were there together when his niece was born. And we've been talking about it, like, your grief is always the same size, right? And you just get bigger. So, because you experience the world and life and all these things, and but I was so glad that I had gotten so big that the grief couldn't have enough space left, that the joy was bigger than even the grief that day.
Okay. Look for the joy.
Yeah.
What I can take away.
Yeah.
Look for the
Well,
joy.
and, honestly, let other people help you. That's the other part. Because it's very isolating. Even though I was not the only one who lost him, my husband, his stepdad lost him, his siblings lost him. I still felt like nobody else was grieving as deeply, and it felt very isolating. And I think suicide is an isolating grief anyway. I mean, societally, it's an isolating grief. But allowing other people in and talking about your child, or your person, even if they're an adult, in the same way you would have talked about your parent who died, not allowing the societal's discomfort with the fact that your child died by suicide to quiet your voice about your child. is so important too.
Yeah, I can envision what you just shared, your son's words about the sun and the fog, and also so much of what you just said. I can envision that as an illustrated book.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah, he should
And
write
then
it.
Yes, yeah, he could write it, and you could be
I'll
the
draw, I'll be
the with author, right? Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
on the topic of social media,
Yeah.
I'm for the why, on why we need certain restrictions, but I'm not for the how. I don't agree with restrictions or the restrictions in Australia at the moment. I don't agree with that at all. And my reason is there's two types of scrolling. There's doom scrolling, where you're taking in all the negativity that the world has to offer. Then there's positive scrolling. This podcast is a component of positive scrolling. If Diana, what was the age groups for suicide in Oregon again?
So overall, it's the number 8 leading cause of death, and it's the
And
second leading cause of death in Oregon. Um, I think it's from 15 upwards to, I'm not exactly sure, maybe 24 or a little bit more, but starting at 15, the second leading cause of death.
I agree with
if
you,
we, if
Kino,
we,
though. I agree with you, though. I mean, I think to act as if social media or, use of social media is, it's one thing if we were to say that there is a direct line from social media to suicide, or a direct line from social media to excess mental health, issues, but that's not how it is, and because it is multifactorial, to cut it off when there are benefits. It's not like a firearm, okay? It's hard to draw a lot of benefits to firearms for young kids, for younger kids. There's pretty much there you can find benefits. Families go hunting together, that's a benefit. You can find you can kill and eat food, that can be a benefit, but there's so much excess harm that to have youth have access to firearms, that's all I'm talking about here. It's hard to find a path that makes sense, Whereas youth and social media, there, as you point out, there are positives. There are youth who find community, communication, and connection, especially especially for rural youth, for marginalized youth, for youth of color, and LGBTQ youth. They get especially so. But there are also youth who are, want to learn stuff, So to just say, nope, none of it, because the three of you over there couldn't use it right, and so nobody gets it. I think I agree with you. I think that's where I feel like we need to have a much more nuanced approach, and consider a lot of other ways to empower parents, empower schools, and make the ways in which kids use their devices and social media easier to guardrail for the youth who are at risk.
Because if it's not for social media, us having this conversation today, this show, this podcast is pointless. It's really pointless. If we don't take this recording and upload it to YouTube, upload it to Spotify, create shorts out of it that goes into TikTok, that goes into Instagram, afterwards, over the next few days, we're not reaching the people, even the youth that we want to reach. So if we restrict them, like completely, someone may be going, a 12-year-old may be going through something right now, and boom, The algorithm is so strong today, where it can actually pick up on your feelings, what you're searching for. And then this podcast shows up. Then they're like, okay, I can do something with my life. I can get past this. So if those restrictions are in place, we're never going to be able to really make an impact on this topic globally. So once again, just an opinion, I hold the education department accountable. I hold parents accountable. This is your responsibility. You need to do something about it, not the
Well, and I
government. The
think we
government doesn't
also have
care.
to hold, we do though. I mean, I do agree that policy can play a role. I just don't think the role policy should have is banning. Okay. So I do think we can use policy as an opportunity to I worked on an advocacy effort called the Kids Online Safety Act, in which we went to Congress, a group of us, and spoke to senators and all the people to say that until you're 18, no algorithm. Okay. So that you can't get sent down the same rabbit holes over and over again. You can search for content. You can then get content delivered to you on social media. But once you've begun looking at content, it doesn't then drive your entire feed in that way. So that if, let's say, you wanted to learn how to apply, I don't know, eye makeup, you don't suddenly then only see skinny models for the rest of your feed forever, and that, even just uncoupling that and not allow targeted ads, things like that can be problematic for younger people who are, in some ways less prepared to, they might be able to say, oh yeah, I think that is a doctored photo. But if all you see are doctored photos all day, it sinks in, it sinks in. So I do think there's still a role for policy. I don't want everything to have to lay at the parents' laps, because it's a lot. It's constantly changing, evolving, et cetera. And that's why I think there should be at least a combo of policy and kind of child and adolescent driven platforms. The platforms need to be responsible for some of the design features so that they are less problematic. And that'll probably only happen through policy.
Molly, can you share anything about the American Academy of Pediatrics, I guess, upcoming statement about AI and youth?
That's, I can't really tell you we haven't finalized the statement. We're still in the process. So there are two branches of the statement. Of course, there's AI use in healthcare, which is what we use as physicians. How do we use AI in practice? I believe that statement is published. We're working on the AI in childhood, like, that piece. What I can say is that AI is much more embedded in our lives than many people even really realize. So children who are digital natives are using AI as soon as they say, hey Siri, or, okay Google, they're using, oh, Siri just responded to me. So they say they're using AI to ask Alexa to play a song, in their living room. So the education system is managing AI in the educational system, and the statement will talk to some of that. How should AI be thought about as a parent, when it comes to your child's learning, and how is AI to be thought about when it comes to your child's creative life, their intellectual life, and their social emotional life. We've heard more and more lately about AI and the kind of guardrail issues around social emotional life. as AI, both chatbots and companions, have with long form conversation over long time, the guardrails break down. And what had previously been a pretty good, firm, we're not going to talk about suicide, we're going to direct you to the suicide
Yeah,
hotline.
here's the 988 number.
Right, exactly.
Mhm.
Those break down, when you start having long conversations with AI, because there's so much sycophancy. The AI wants to please you. They want to be your cheerleader and champion, and they want you to like them, essentially, oddly enough. The ChatGPT 4.0 was very sycophantic, and the 5.0 less so, and that's why people don't like it and have gone back to using 4.0, because they really want to be liked. People want to be liked, so they go back to the old version. But I do think cleaning up that piece of the way the AI is driven to respond is going to be important, but we will also be addressing what should be the platform's responsibility when it comes to self-harm conversations. There's some responses that are already taking place. ChatGPT, for example, will now, if someone under 18 is having conversations or with a companion or an AI chatbot, a parent can have parental controls that allows them to see the equivalent of a summary or a theme-based summary of those kinds of conversations. And that way, a parent can then go to their child and say, hey, I see you're talking about end of life stuff. Are you concerned about grandma or yourself? And have that conversation started, because they'll have the summary in place. And I don't know if Claude or Anthropic, I don't know what the other ones are doing around that, but most, I think, will end up going the same way.
There's a court case.
Oh yeah.
pending.
No, there are multiple now around this because of the difficulty. And noteworthy, I think, in those cases are the ages of the people, and most of them are in that fragile age that we were talking about.
We're talking about suicide, death,
Correct.
and also having conversations with AI.
Exactly. So these younger kids getting in these conversations and finding it difficult, I think, to both separate from that conversation and also to the AI companion or the chatbot then, as they begin to talk more about their thoughts of self-harm or suicidality, begins to reinforce those thoughts rather than tamp them down. And a good friend, of course, would say, what are you thinking? No, you can't do that. Or please don't. Or I got to tell somebody this
I
isn't
need to
safe,
tell someone.
These
As
are
your friend, I need
right.
to.
These are the things you'd hear from a person, right? But the chatbot isn't doing that. The chatbot is wanting, it's too anthropomorphic, but the chatbot is responding with phrases that seem as if it wants you to like them.
Reinforcing what the person is saying rather than challenging it.
Yeah.
Dr. Molly, do you have any final words or penultimate words to share with our audience, whether that's a young person who's listening, an older person, a parent, a healthcare professional?
I guess I would encourage, kids and parents both to be open with one another, and parents especially, to ask your kids curious questions. Ask questions in a way that assume you don't know the answer. Often parents are going to their kid with an accusative question or a question that is put in a way that the kid doesn't have a lot of room to answer.
You better answer it the way I want
Right.
you to.
And by going instead with a question like, wow, you've been spending a lot of time on, with your phone. I'm really interested. What are you learning about? I'd love to know, or it seems like Instagram is really interesting right now. Show me like the 3 things on your feed you find the most interesting or the funniest or what's grabbing your attention. That's a really different conversation than, hey, you've spent 3 hours on Instagram today. That's it. You're done. So you'll learn a lot more about your child, and you'll not only learn what are they looking at and what are they interested in, but you'll actually begin a dialogue, and you can hear what it is that they actually are caring about. And who knows, maybe you'll be interested in it too. So I think having those kinds of conversations creates an opening for bigger conversations that will make a difference in your life and theirs, and allow them to see that you're not just about setting those, slam dunk, boundaries, but that you're actually curious about what's happening in their life.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Right. I also want to ask you, share with you an idea that I had while we were talking. If the American Academy of Pediatrics in their annual meeting, right, or I can look into the American Academy of Child Psychiatry, might ever be interested in a panel of healthcare professionals where there has been suicide loss, whether that's personal, familial, patient. I think that would be a very worthwhile panel to have, because this is not talked about enough, right? From that perspective, I think that you and I would have a lot to share and a lot to give.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea.
We should talk about that.
Yeah, great idea.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye.
All right. Bye. Nice to talk with you.